Welcome to the Ministry and Podcast, authentic conversations about lament, endurance, and hope. This podcast is a production of the CCL Network.
I have been serving in vocational ministry for 45 years. I've pastored 5 churches in 4 different states. My name is John, and this is my story of ministry and disappointment.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Ministry and Podcast. My name is Heather Walton.
I'm Mike Edmiston, and I am so glad to introduce our guest today, John Hampton. John, I'm proud to call John a friend of mine. John is a ministry lifer. He has served in churches in numerous states and now serves as the director of the Compelling Preaching Initiative for the Christian Church Leadership Network. John, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Mike and Heather. It's an honor to be with you, and looking forward to our time together today.
Yeah, so John, the podcast is called Ministry and because ministry doesn't fit in a nice, neat little box. It's always ministry and something else. So let's talk a little bit about what the something else has been for you over the years.
Yeah, happy to do so. I started serving in a ministry when I was really young, Mike. I was a freshman at Cincinnati Bible College in the fall of 1980, and I had a note that was slipped under my door one day. I think it was in September, and it was from the academic dean, Earl Sims, or Dean of Students. I forget which title they had, but I thought, I haven't been here long enough to flunk out. But he wanted to see me, and so we hadn't even had midterm, exams at that point. So I go see. He said, "Hey, there's this little church that's looking for a preacher, and they've heard about you." And he said they'd like for you to come preach. Mike, Heather, I was 17 at the time, so I was really young. And I thought, first of all, how'd they hear about me? 1980, this is not internet. This is not, social media. This is word of mouth, I guess. I grew up not too far away from where this little church was located. And so I went and I preached, and there was a preacher there, or an elder, and he's deceased now, so I'll use his first name. His name's Garnet, and Garnet was the elder. He was the Sunday school. He was the only elder. He was the Sunday school superintendent. He was the treasurer of the church. So basically, it was Garnet and God that ran that church. And I'm not sure that, I think that was the right order. So I got to know Garnet pretty well. We added another elder later on. His name was Billy Batt, B-A-T-T-E, Billy Batt. And Billy and Garnet were the elders of the church. And part of why we added an elder, I said, listen, if we're going to be a New Testament church, we got to have at least 2 elders. We can't have an elder. We got to have elders. It's what the New Testament church is, organized. So Billy joined the elder team, but there was one influential, and maybe that's what we could call this episode as well. It's ministry and that hidden influencer,
Mm-hmm.
that hidden power broker, Mike.
Yes.
And in this case, it was the widow of a former elder. Her name was Lillian, and her husband was an elder. He died of a heart attack before I came to the church, and but Lillian was a very influential gal in the church. And that came to light when we it's hard to describe this little church. It's like a little postcard country church. It had a white frame, like a bell tower on the front, white frame building. You step inside the door and you're right into the worship area. It could seat maybe 100 people, 3 sections of wooden pews, one on either side and a section in the middle and then the pulpit area. And that's where I started preaching at this church. And there were about probably 30 to 40 people, Mike, when I started. So one of the things that we thought we ought to do, especially in the wintertime, the church was in Kentucky, when you stepped in the door and when the service had started, you stepped right into the worship area. There was nothing to separate the front door from stepping into the worship area. Okay. So and we had a little archway that was just inside the front door. And I said, why don't we build a wall? So people won't feel awkward. They won't interrupt the service, won't disturb the service. Let's just build a wall right here. And when people step in out of the cold or step in out of the heat or the rain, they can take a few moments and then they'll just come through some doors and into the worship center and be a lot less intrusive. So Garnet and Billy, the 2 elders, said, okay, let's have a congregational vote. Had a congregational vote.
So we got a vote on building a wall. Okay.
Well, okay. Mike, yes. There are some versions of our churches that need to vote on just about anything.
Yep.
It's not a costly project. I mean, you could imagine putting a wall up and maybe push doors you go through to get in. So I don't know how much it would have cost. Not a lot. We took a vote on it. And I think if I remember correctly, Mike, the vote was 21-10. All right. 21-10, as I remember, in favor of building it. However, among the 10 that voted against it was Lillian, her family, and she let that be known to Garnet and Billy. And so after the vote that afternoon, Garnet and Billy want to meet with me. And I said, okay. And they said, listen, Lillian's not happy about this. And she thinks it's going to ruin the aesthetics of our worship area, and she doesn't like it. And Garnet is the spokesman here. He said, Billy and I don't think we should do it. It's going to upset Lillian. I said, well, guys, we just voted 21-10. I mean, we announced the result of the vote. And they said, well, we don't think we should do it. So I guess early on in my ministry, now you got to understand I was probably 18 or 19 at the time. All right. And there was not much refinement in 18 or 19-year-old John Hampton. I'm not sure there is now, but there was a lot less then, Mike. So I don't know what I said. I was not happy. I tried to contain it, but the hurt and disappointment wasn't necessarily for me. It was now I had to explain to the congregation, the people who voted for it. Yeah, we voted 21-10 to do this, but we're not going to do it. And I had to defend the elders in doing this, and it was tough. It was tough, and that congregation, the people, and we saw some new families that come to the congregation after I started there. One was really new, and they were really upset about this. Well, I can't. Well, why do we vote? You get all those questions. Well, why do we vote? Well, why didn't we just do why didn't we just go to Lillian in the first place and say, what do you want to do? Does Lillian run the church? Well, why is Garnet and Billy letting? I mean, you get into all those kind of conversations, and so church hurt. I know that's a term you're using on this podcast. I don't know if it was hurt as much as I was just kind of confused and and disappointment, I guess is the right word. But I learned something, I think, pretty early. I had a choice to make, and the choice is when the elders say, this is what we want to do, are you going to submit to that?
Mm.
And I chose obviously to do that, and to try to present their case as best I could going forward. I stayed there 4 years, the whole time I was in Bible college. I do think that was a pivotal moment in leadership for me, because here's what I've learned. Submission doesn't mean anything if everybody agrees about everything.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if everybody's agreeing about everything, then there's nobody submitting, you're just agreeing. Submission only means something when you hit on something you don't agree on.
Mm.
When you don't like it. When it's not what you want. That's where you say, okay, I'm going to submit to that. Submission doesn't mean I agree with it. I didn't agree with it, but I submitted to it. And I felt like that was an important lesson for me as a young preacher, to understand New Testament church governance and New Testament church authority as I understand it.
Yeah, so you've kind of described submission in some ways to us, but you've also used this word refinement. And I think that a lot of times refinement comes whether we submit or whether we choose to have hard conversations and work through processes of reconciliation. So maybe you could walk us through some of those things. What did your refinement look like?
Yeah. I think refinement for me, Heather, in that situation was about just trying to understand a little more the motives, not only of the two elders, but of the lady that really didn't want that. And I had a good conversation with her afterwards. I got along well with all these families, and particularly Lee, and I had a lot of respect for her. Her husband was a well thought of part of our church family, and again before I came, and so I said, Lee, why didn't you talk to me about this when we first brought the idea up? That's if you'd have just said, hey, I don't really like this. Well, we could have had that conversation on the front end. Why wait till the back end? I think that's definitely something that learning is. Let's try to understand, number one, who are those influencers? And I think I heard John Maxwell describe an influencer. If you want to know who an influencer is in the church, there's three questions to ask. If I wanted to start something, who would I go to? What are those names? If I wanted to stop something, who would I go to? What are those names? And if I wanted to start something, I wanted to stop something, and I wanted to know something, who would I go to? If the same names appear on all three of those lists, that's a high influencer.
Mm.
It's someone that really has a lot of influence in your church. So that's part of just understanding that process going forward. How do I as a leader avoid putting projects or asking for support on things where there's going to be problems, where there's going to be issues. So trying to understand that ahead of time.
So obviously the wall didn't get built. I'm assuming it never got built the entire time you were there, correct? So
It never did, and still isn't. All these days, all these years later, Mike, it still is not built. Yeah, correct.
Yep. So clearly you didn't view that as this, I'm going to die on this mountain.
Yeah.
I'm going to submit. I'm not dying on this mountain. But I'm guessing that there are points in your long ministry where you said, no, this is the mountain I'm dying on. How do you decide this is a mountain worth dying on, or I don't agree with this, but this is not where I'm letting this one go? How do you make that decision?
Yeah, I think obviously this was a small, in the grand scheme of things, it was a small building project, right? It was a small building project. It wasn't, and it was about aesthetics. I thought it had it wouldn't, the functionality, just the convenience factor, those types of things. But those aren't, I've never believed those are the types of issues that you want to go to the mat on. The issues you're going to go to the mat on are going to be much bigger topics that have to do with the very mission of the church. What is our church really about? What is our church really about? What is our church really about?
At Christian Church Leadership, we have built a network of seasoned, proven gospel communicators who mentor preachers in groups and one-on-one, helping them level up their preaching. 10 sessions cover topics such as the importance of self-awareness as a preacher, preaching Christ from any text, compelling storytelling, and relevant application, leading people to decide to follow Jesus, using creative elements in your messages, and using your sermons to equip your listeners. The cost to participate in this cohort is $50 per session or $500 total. If you would like to learn more about joining a preaching cohort, contact John Hampton at john.hampton@ccleadership.org. That's john.hampton@ccleadership.org. We would love to help you level up your preaching.
What is our church really about? What is our church really about? Are we about loving God, loving people, serving the world? Are we about making disciples? And when we run into issues like that seem to take us from away from that mission, then I think those are the things where we got to say, no, I've got to put my hand up here. I got to put my foot down. As a leader, I just can't support that. I think those are the kinds of conversations that I think, Mike, are where you're gonna be more likely to take a stand. I think of that scripture where Paul says, I had to confront Peter to his face. Mm-hmm. And he was confronting him over Peter acting one way among the Gentiles when Jews weren't present, and acting another way when Jews were present. So, some of that goes back to the ethnic differences of and how the gospel goes from Jew to Gentile, and what does that mean? I think there are some matters there where we need to say, hey, we need to make sure that the gospel and the gospel of grace is available to everybody. I think when you get and one of the things that we said at our church at Journey is everybody's welcome. Nobody's perfect. Through Jesus, anything's possible. But when you say everybody's welcome, I think that's important to think through. What does that mean? And how are we, James said in Acts chapter 15, let's not make it difficult for Gentiles who are turning to God. Those are the kinds of questions where you need to say, we want to be clear and we want to be firm about not making things difficult for people to come to faith. We want to make sure that people know this is a church where everybody's welcome. Doesn't mean everybody's right, and that's a qualifier I would add. Saying everybody's welcome doesn't mean everybody's right and anybody do whatever they want, but everybody's welcome to repent and follow Jesus. And how do we make that possible? And how can we make that more accessible? I think those are the kinds of questions, and those are the kind of issues that you're going to be more firm on.
Yeah, so maybe even further than that, what are some things that you've learned or even some experiences that you've had when you've had to deal with your own disappointments, but then still be able to have some of those crucial conversations and have some of those confrontations, maybe even for the sake of the gospel or the mission of the church or the people that are in the congregation that you're serving in?
Well, let me answer that, Heather, by telling another story, if I may.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
So, several years after that, I'm serving at another congregation, also in Kentucky. This was in Lexington. And at this point, I'm probably 10 years older, still late 20s, maybe early 30s, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood. And so this is a church that had, I would call it a turnaround church. Part of my history, it seems like, looking back on the churches where I entered to serve, I followed leadership implosions or leadership failures. Some were moral failures related to, marriages not lasting, or just really leaders melting down. I went into a situation in Lexington where there had been the exit of a pastor that was made some questionable decisions. We'll just say it that way. And so over time, I led, and it was still a pretty traditional ministry, but we were in the process of making some changes. And that's when I first ran across Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church, the Purpose-Driven Church book. Now, later on, Warren, his bestseller was The Purpose-Driven Life, but before that was The Purpose-Driven Church. And that's where I began to understand we need to be more intentional about how we're doing church. We need to be more intentional, more on purpose. And I started leading that, and I started teaching some of those principles to the church that I was serving at the time. Well, another group of influential folks who liked the way things were. They didn't like the changes that were being introduced. And I guess I got wind of that in different conversations, different, means of communication that would come. I probably didn't do enough up front talking to these folks and saying, hey, I'm hearing some things. Help me understand what's happening. So I didn't handle that well. But it reached a critical point when somebody in this group got our mailing list and sent out an anonymous letter. And it detailed several things they didn't like about the church, some accusations about how we were conducting some business in the church, some personal things about my leadership in particular. That hurt. That was definitely ministry hurt when that happened. And I was embarrassed. I mean, I guess going back to, we all have lies in the bottom of our heart that we believe. I think there was a book, The Lies We Believe, written about that. But I think there's lies that all of us have come to believe about ourselves over a period of time. And one of the lies that was in my heart was, you're going to embarrass everybody. And honestly, a lot of my life I've lived with that. And I don't know where that came from. I don't know if that's from my family of origin. Someone told me that as an adult. But I was always very self-conscious about that. So, not embarrassing myself, not doing anything that would be humiliating. That's very, very real in my internal world. So when this happened, it was like my worst fear came to pass. I was humiliated. I was exposed. I was hurt. I mean, is the only way to put it. So in Lexington at the time, Wayne Smith was the preacher at Southland Christian Church. It's a shame today's generation of preachers don't know who Wayne Smith is. Wayne was.
It really is. Yes.
Mike, yeah, Wayne. I've never met anybody quite like Wayne.
One of one. Wayne was one of one.
Yeah, very funny guy, great heart, outspoken, but would do anything for you. And Wayne, I called him up. I said, Brother Smith, can I come see you? And he had an office at Southland Christian Church, but a business owner in his church also let him have like a storefront office that was off the Southland property. And Wayne said, come see me at this office. So I went to him and I showed him the copy of the letter, and he read it and he shook his head, and I was just upset. And he said, well, you got to address this. He spoke like, he said, you got to address this. And I said, yeah. I said, I am. I said, I'm going to talk about it on Sunday, as a matter of fact. He said, good. And then he said this to me. He said, can you cry? He said, it'll help you if you can cry. As only Wayne could. Yep. So I was crying in his office, and I don't know if he thought I could manufacture the tears, or if can you cry? It'll help you if you can cry. So I the next Sunday we had what we called just a family meeting. I remember this very well. I said, hey, today we're going to do something a little different. I said, we're going to have a family meeting. We need to address something that's happened inside the church family. If you're a guest here today, so glad you're here. Probably need to visit us again, catch us on a more normal Sunday, if there is such a thing. But today is going to be a little bit of family talk. And, I just kind of addressed what was sent out. I didn't ignore it. It was the elephant in the room, so to speak. And I addressed it. And at the end of that service, I'll never forget this as well. So the elders and the deacons, they were very supportive of me. They rejected this, even though they may have wanted to know a little bit more information about some of the things there. But I was transparent with them. I said, guys, you know the situation financially, the decisions we made, here's where we are. So they were on board. At the end of that service, the elders and the deacons all came up and stood behind me as like a show of support. Like, this is our guy, and we support him. And then we sang, because in that church the tradition was we did an invitation, we had a response, invited people to respond. And I'm not kidding you, 2 people joined the church that day. 2 people responded. They were believers, been baptized already, but they said, we want to join this church. Let me tell you, there's something about somebody that will join your church after a message like that. When you want to go in the foxhole with those people, you want to.
Yes.
So I was very curious. I'm curious what was said today. You heard what we said. What they said, you know what? We were just so happy to hear a church leader just tell the truth and just be honest, be transparent, be authentic. Here's the reality. People in the world know churches are messed up. They just want to know if we know they're messed up and if we'll acknowledge that. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Will you acknowledge that when we said here, everybody's welcome, nobody's perfect? Well, nobody's perfect includes me, includes all of us. We're fallen people following a resurrected Lord, but we're going to make mistakes, and things aren't going to always turn out the way we want, and we don't handle things well. And So these guys were just saying, hey, and they were both men, and they both said the same thing. It was refreshing to come to a church, to hear them not hide their problems, talk about it, and just say, as best as we can do going forward, here's what we're going to do.
Man, I love that. Sorry about that. I love that. I resonate with that too, because I led a turnaround church and actually had a letter writing campaign about me. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's painful. It's painful.
It hurts. It hurts to see somebody that's willing to put pen to paper and just take you apart. And they did. And it was at a point where it was kind of a tipping point for us. I really didn't know which way it was going to go. But the elders went to the mat for me. And just resonating with your story. And if there's somebody, every church has its politics. I mean, I know that politics is a charged word, but anywhere there are people, there are politics. And in the political structure of a church, if the elders, if the leadership team and the ministry staff, if they are united, that's powerful. That's powerful. But man, if a power broker can divide that, and that's what they were trying to do, is divide elder and staff, because divide and conquer. So John, if you would speak a little more into that, if somebody's dealing with a church that's got some struggle, got some infighting, got some power brokers pulling back and forth, I mean, what would you tell a staff member or a leader in that church? What would you tell them right now?
I think the most important thing is to make sure you know where your elders are with whatever that governing structure is that you report to. If it's elders, if it's a board, if it's trustees, whatever that structure is that you as the leader report to, you need to have a conversation with them first. And that's where I always went. I was never a guy, and maybe because of that fear in me that, you're going to embarrass everybody, I didn't hold on to information that I felt was important, for leaders to know. So I would share. I was quick to share. So when this happened, they got the letter too. I mean, everybody on the mailing list got the letter, so wasn't any denying it. So we had a meeting together, and it was an emotional meeting. I mean, it was a tough meeting, and I just again tried to address each of the sometimes statements, sometimes questions, sometimes charges, and some things you just toss aside, like, we're not even going to. You don't need to respond to that. But if there's an important question about, how did you handle that situation? Where did the money go about this? A lot of times, Mike, Heather, it's amazing how much of these kind of things are driven because of finances, because of a project, because of how funds are used, or and one of the things that happens in local churches, it's amazing how many people use their finances as a means of control. And the smaller the church, the more that can be a factor. I mean, there may be a handful of families that are really the bulk of giving at a church, and if they decide they're going to withhold their giving, that makes a huge difference. I mean, in today's world, what we're seeing now with football coaches being fired, and their buyouts are amazing. My primary residence in the state of Florida, I understand that there were some major donors that just met with the athletic director a week ago, and the nature of all that wasn't disclosed. But the bottom line was this: if you don't make some changes, you're not going to get our money. And the Florida team, the week the coach got fired, he actually won the game, but that decision was already made. Those boosters had already spoken. scale that down into hundreds and thousands of dollars in local churches, but same principle. There'll be families that say, "Hey, we're not going to continue to support this." That always leads to some difficult conversations among church leadership. So, back to your original question, Mike. I would always want to make sure. And if there was a question that the elders had, or that leadership group over me, if they were uncertain, I said, "Well, guys, let's get certain. Especially, let's get certain before we face Sunday." And because if people sniff that there's an opening, there's a crack between staff and other leaders, bad information. I always said this, Mike and Heather: what people don't know, they make up, and they never make up good things. So that's why I think it's important that you share information as soon as possible, even if it's not good information, even if it's information that's just not good. You got to share. Facts are our friends. I've always believed that the facts are our friends, and when you get good information, then you can make much better decisions. So I think that's one thing I would make sure. Let's see where the leaders are, because you're right, Mike. If your leaders stand behind you, you can put up with a lot of stuff. Yeah. You can deal with a lot of things, and you can lead in some difficult areas if you know you have the backing. If you don't have the backing of your leaders, then that's going to be another conversation. That's going to be another conversation of, well, is it time for me to move on and to make some changes?
Yeah, so let's just continue in that vein. What does it look like to discern, when you've kind of reached your breaking point of disappointments and you hear the Lord saying, "Okay, it's time to do the next thing. I have this next thing prepared for you." What does that look like in your mind?
I think there's three things that it's important to keep in mind. One is there's identity, there's calling, and there's assignment. Okay, identity is who you are, and our identity is in Christ. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you'll also appear with him. That's what Paul said in Colossians. Jesus is our life. Our identity is in him. Our calling is what we do. I was called, I believe, from an early age to be a preacher. And so even though I'm not the preacher of a local church anymore, I still preach and I help other preachers, and I have a calling to do that. And I think that calling will be with me until I'm gone or not able to function anymore in that role. Assignment is where you do it. Your identity never changes. I don't think your calling changes, but your assignments will change. And sometimes those assignments change as you understand it and as you interpret your own sense of what God's calling you to do in a season of your life. Could be a family factor that's going on. And sometimes those seasons change from forces from without. And we don't choose those things, but at the same time, we have to accept that our assignment is changing. I've talked to two pastors in the last few weeks, both parted ways from their churches and not by their choosing. And I've talked with them about this. Your identity is set, it's in Christ. Your calling is you're going to pastor, you're a preacher, but your assignment has changed. And our assignments are really the ministry jobs that we have. And if you were a pastor in your congregation, and if someone loses their job, what would you say to them? They get fired from their job, they're downsized in their job. You lost your job, but you didn't lose yourself. You didn't lose who you are. I mean, we would tell people that as pastors. Pastors need to know that as well. I had a job. I no longer have that job for different reasons. And I've always believed that God will provide me with another assignment. He has another assignment for me. I don't always get to determine that assignment and that assignment length. Unfortunately, thankfully, I was able to be in a position where when I left the churches that I served, it was my decision. But there are a lot of guys and gals, they leave not when they want to. That's even more important to say, hey, this was an assignment that I had for a while. I did the best I could, and now I'm going to trust that God has a new assignment for me. That's helped me have a good, a healthy paradigm of church. I think here, something we don't talk enough about. If you're in a church and you've got a budget and you've got a building and you've got a staff and you have compliance requirements and there are, outside agencies, that are saying, hey, you need to comply to these things, and you have a payroll and you have HR and you have policies, that's a job. I mean, we fulfill our ministry in the context of a job, but that's a job that we have. And jobs come and go. They do. As well as in the church, in the college, Christian college world, in parachurch world, jobs come and go. And we come and go in and out of jobs. We have to be settled on our identity and our calling.
We do, because for a long time as a pastor, I flipped assignment. And my assignment became my identity.
Yeah, right. And it's easy to do, Mike. And that happens way, our activity is synonymous with our identity. And that's a danger. That's a danger. And that's one of the things we talk about in our preaching cohorts. How do we distinguish the work that God is doing in me and the work that He does through me? That's an important distinction. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it became so clear to me when I finally realized, you know what? If I feel like Sunday goes well, I'm going to have a good week. And if I feel like Sunday didn't go well, I'm not going to have a good week. My whole week was based on 1 hour. Yeah. Like, for the next 7 days, it's going to be based on just how that went. That's how much my identity was tied to what I was doing, my assignment. And that is a dangerous, dangerous place to be, because I woke up one day and I wasn't the pastor of a local church anymore. Now, like you, I mean, I left on my own terms, but it's still not a move I saw coming. I did not see that chapter coming. And I went through, I would call it a minor identity crisis. I had to figure out how to be a follower of Christ when my employer wasn't a church. That was really hard for me. And it's because the assignment and identity blurred together. And I'm sure you work with people who are struggling with that. I'm sure you struggle with that at times yourself. It's like you said, it's really easy to do.
I learned ministry can eat you alive if you don't settle those identity principles. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand your identity and calling from God apart from an employment in ministry or mission, you're probably not going to survive it. I really do think that there's a quote I want to share with you here. This is so good. I just ran across this recently, and I include it in almost every talk I do. David Fairchild is the one who shared this quote, or is the author of it. He says, "Ministry is not for the faint of heart. If you need constant affirmation, appreciation for your efforts, applause for your preaching, praise for your leadership, or abundant patience when you fail, this calling will crush you. It's not that these never occur, they do, but never with the frequency required to sustain a man who depends on them for his joy." Wow. That's a powerful statement. And then he said this, the formula is simple. Love, lead, limp. Do this faithfully for a few decades, then embrace obscurity and die. The world may not notice, but the Savior you served will, and His reward is greater than anything you sought from man. Amen.
Amen.
That's it, man. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think that's such an encouraging word. I mean, even for myself, as my husband and I are in a season of transition, just to really know the core of our identity and have that grounded in the image of God and as an apprentice to Jesus and just being filled with the Spirit, those things are the things that sustain us and give us hope for the next things, the next assignment that is to come. And then we're not shaken by the disappointment or the hurts or whatever category and adjective we might fill in the blank with. So I
Yes.
think that's such a good encouragement for us.
Every leader I know has an ungrieved loss, an unforgiven offense, or an unhealed wound. And it's left them with a noticeable leadership limp. And I think the task of ministering over the long haul is being able to address those things in a healthy way. And that's part of what we try to do as an extension of the compelling preaching initiative. We have a group called Role and Soul cohorts. And the Role and Soul cohort is the role of preaching, the soul of the preacher. And that's what we talk about. The role of preaching, that's important. We really do a deep dive into the role of preaching in our Level Up Preaching cohorts. That's all about preaching. But Role and Soul cohorts are probably more about the soul of the preacher. And it's dealing with those ministry hurts, those ministry disappointments, those ministry times when expectations, when there was a gap between what you expected and what you experienced. It's helping guys deal with that. We're excited as we've seen two of those cohorts completely completed their course. Two are in the process of happening, and we do those we start one every spring and every fall, every April and every September. My buddy David Vaughn and I lead those together. But those are some important things that we talk about in those times. Is how do we deal with those ungrieved losses? I believe, Mike, you've heard me talk about this. I believe a lot of mental health challenges come because people have unacknowledged and ungrieved losses. And when we're talking about hurt and disappointment, however you want to describe it, there's a loss there. And a lot of times we don't acknowledge the depth of the loss. We've not grieved it. Understanding grief is one of the most important things you can do, I think, in your ministry. And I'm not just talking about when people die and helping people through the death process. I'm talking about your own grief. When you lose a job, when you lose an initiative that you really wanted, when you lose a staff member. I had a staff member at another church I served that went from our staff, which was a pretty large church at the time, about 2 miles down the street. And he was our worship leader, very visible person on our platform. He decides to go 2 miles down the street to that church. Well, that hurt. That was a hurt. But you got to you got to allow yourself to acknowledge the loss, to grieve the loss, and then you can get in a healthier place.
Yeah, it reminds me, John, of the book called Replenish by Lance Witt.
Love it.
Man, I actually had the opportunity to interview Lance on a webinar several months ago, but
I know.
His point in that book is, he said, this is what I've learned. Essentially, he said, you can be a success in ministry, a success, quote unquote, in ministry and not have a healthy soul.
Amen.
Man, and if you measure it by the metrics that we often use to measure success, somebody can look really successful on the outside, but I mean, they're just dying in their soul. Ungrieved losses, I mean, all of that stuff. And he proposed that it's actually one of the best leadership books I've ever read. and it's not nuts and bolts. Here's how you do this and this and this.
Right.
His whole driving question is, how is it with your soul? You know, that's the question. How is it with your soul? I got to the point I would open staff meetings with that question. That'll set a different tone. But how is it with your soul? How do you talk to people in ministry about making sure, you know, we're charged with caring for the souls of the people in our churches. What about caring for your own soul? What do you coach them in that?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And so much a part of soul care is how do you deal with the disappointments in your life, in your leadership, in other leaders around you? How do you deal with those disappointments?
That's a key too, because other leaders, people are going to disappoint you, man. They
Absolutely.
are going to let you, which by the way, you're going to let them down too, but people are going to let you down. I was talking to a pastor a few months ago, and he said, I am just so used to people disappointing me. You know, and my heart broke for him, but it's at the same time, it's like, I get it. But I interrupted you, John. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of my favorite quotes on leadership. I think the guy's name is Ron Heifetz from Harvard. He said, leadership is the art of disappointing people at a rate they can stand. That's one of my favorite leadership quotes.
Wow.
Now, sometimes with people, I get ahead of schedule. For them. I disappoint them too much too quickly. But it's the art of disappointing people at a rate they can stand. And that will happen to you as well. Yeah.
Well, John, we really, really appreciate all of the stories and the wisdom that you've shared with us today. It's been a delight to just listen in on some of your experiences and some hardships and struggle and disappointment. So we thank you for sharing that, and we honor those things. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Heather. It was a joy to be with you, and I pray what we shared today will be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
Hey, stick around because the conversation's not over. Mike and Heather are going to unpack everything we just heard a little bit more. But we're curious about your thoughts. How did this episode connect to your life? How does it relate to the ways you've experienced ministry? And leave a comment, leave a review. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, that was a masterclass in ministry and leadership from John. I've heard John. I get to hear John speak and share a lot with pastors and leaders, and I can just tell you that with John, like, what you see is what you get. There's no pretense. He is just upfront and honest and authentic, and I just appreciate that so much about him, and that really came out in this interview.
Yeah, and I think he emphasized that as he was, encouraging others as well, just to be honest and vulnerable and say the hard things and have those conversations and be vulnerable with the people, especially above you, that you need to submit to. So yeah, very, very good stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, that story that he told of his church where he got with the leaders, met with Wayne Smith, but then got up on Sunday and just said, hey, we're having a family meeting. We're going to call it out. Like, everything that I think I know about leadership would be like, no, you never do that. You don't do it. You got to, everything's positive and it's all happy and it's all good all the time. And John just rebuffs that by saying facts are our friends. And two people joined the church out. I mean, only God can do that. Like, we have this raw, honest meeting about this broken thing that's happening, and two people says, I want to be part of that. But that is a huge leadership lesson, even for me today, just like remembering, you know what, if something's positive, that's great. But if it's not, people have eyes and ears and brains, and they can see it and they know it's broken. Are we willing to call out those elephants in the room? Mm-hmm. There is so much wisdom there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's when the kingdom can really break in. Maybe pun intended here, let those walls down and just have space for the gospel truth to be presented in a way that people are like, wow, that is real. And that is the love of God. I can see it. It's evident in John's life. So
Yeah, and I mean, John said, people in the world, they know the church is messed up. Like, that's not news to them. He said they want to know if we know that the church is messed up. And that's...
We know, but we try to hide it, and that's to our detriment, Yeah.
I mean, people can just... people can spot a fake, They know. They know. And that's... just being willing to be honest about the good and the bad, the positives and the struggles, and just trusting that God's going to honor that honesty and authenticity. That's a message that I needed to hear several times throughout my years in local church ministry, because I would tend to, we got to put a positive spin on it. And it's like, no, sometimes you just gotta tell the truth. And I really appreciate that about John. And, you said, we were talking to John off camera, and you said you had so many good little 3-point, like 3-point this, 3-point that, and John's the master at that. What stuck out to you in those little 3-point things?
Yeah. I'm not going to get all 3 because I didn't have my notebook in front of me. I didn't know I was getting a sermon. But
you always get a sermon when John's around, always.
He said, we love, we lead, and we limp. I think maybe those were his 3. And that is a good word right there for how to handle ministry disappointments and do it with grace and truth. And so I want to go back and listen and remember those.
Yeah, it's, I was told one time, like, never trust a leader without a limp. And I mean, that's true, because if you do this, you're going to take shots, and you are going to, you can heal, but you're always going to have a limp. And for me, it was the, knowing your identity and your calling and your assignment, and not getting those 3 things out of order, not getting them mixed up. I got them mixed up at several points along the way. I conflated those things, and just a good word for us.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us on Ministry, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I definitely have. And if you did, you know the deal. Like, subscribe. We'd love for you to share it out on your social media channels, because John's wisdom, John's words need to be heard and heeded to anybody who's in ministry and church leadership. So help us get the word out there. But thanks so much for joining us, and hope you catch us next time.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.
The Ministry and Podcast is a production of the CCL Network, hosted by Mike Edmiston and Heather Walton, produced by Jonathan Burian. The theme song is Rebels by New Alchemist. For more content, you can find us wherever podcasts are found, and on YouTube at Ministry and Podcast. That's Ministry, A-N-D, Podcast. If you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at ministryan@ccleadership.org. Or you can visit ccl.network for more information about the Christian Church Leadership Network, helping churches and church leaders thrive.